The way I see it, it's America is 50 different, especially when it comes to this, America is 50 different countries with kind of minor trade agreements.
Yeah, I was in front of the Ohio Gaming Commission, their monthly meeting recently. I said that, like, we're dealing with 50 little countries. It's like being in the European Union.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Business of Betting podcast. I am your host, Jeff Edelstein, senior analyst at ingame.com. I'm joined today by Adam Bjorn, the CEO of Plannatech Group. I mean, it's selling you short. It's been quite a ride in the sports betting streets for you over the last 30 years or so, huh?
Yeah, been around for a day or two, starting pretty much straight out of high school in Australia and, now trying to chip away into the US and what they're trying to do on the regulated side.
I'm sure you've talked about it before, but since you brought it up to start, let me just ask you, tell me what got you into the business? Why did you want to join the business straight out of high school? And maybe also is the way that Australia looks at this and reads sports betting, especially when you were, younger, how much different is that than an 18-year-old in New Jersey, say, decide to get into this out of high school?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have a horse race that stops the nation every year in the Melbourne Cup. So we're kind of, in school, you're watching a horse race first Tuesday of November. And whether that turns into like a Calcutta, a sweeps, or some kind of 50 cent each way bet on the Melbourne Cup, it's ingrained in the culture, the gambling aspect. And generally, that's what it was when I was growing up. And we've sort of been able to date it to around 8 to 10 years old when I started betting horses. So by the time I got to 18, it was actually legal in a couple of states. It started with Northern Territory, which was kind of like your Nevada, where there was a couple of sports books opened up there. And then the casino in Victoria or in Melbourne opened up just before I turned 18, I believe, because my first sports betting bet was George Foreman, Michael Moorer, heavyweight fight, which would have been 94, I think October, November. And then I was playing football, Aussie rules, in the winter in the south, and then I'd go north and play in the summer so I could get to play Aussie rules 12 months a year. And that was kind of my goal, play Aussie rules all my life. And then it happened to fall into seeing an ad in a paper and look at the junior ticket writer. And then once I got on the other side and started getting educated there, I become a lot better. And then sort of Australia opened up it has post-PASPA with multiple states getting involved, and it just become, an industry. But unlike the US, there wasn't, disdain or anything against gambling because horse racing, slot machines, it was just on every corner kind of thing.
Let me ask you this, just out of curiosity, what your take is, being that's how you grew up. So we're now in, gambling, right, in America, it was seen as Vegas, it was seen as dirty. Then, it started opening up casinos, riverboat casinos in the 90s, and got a little bit bigger. But obviously in the last 10 years or so, post-PASPA, it's, sports betting obviously has really come to dominate a lot of conversation. So much of America has been gamblified, even at the kiddie level, with blind boxes and Pokemon cards and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm just curious for your take, since we're talking about it. Do you see that in 20, 30 years time, America's going to look differently at gambling, much maybe in the same way that Australians look at it?
Well, the unfortunate signs that I've seen, and really fantasy was a Trojan horse to sports betting's a Trojan horse to iGaming. And I think sports is getting a bad rap on being the bad guy in gambling, where it's, as much as a skill game as it is true gambling, where it's the iGaming that, if every American with their level of consumerism has iGaming on their phone within 10 years, I think there's, a real danger of almost an imploding economy or levels of gaming that will definitely hurt the ecosystem and the culture. And you're sort of seeing signs of that. But you've also got some that are sort of coming out. And I understand responsible gaming. I appreciate responsible gaming, but I also think everyone's an adult once you get to that level and you have the ability to do it if you want to. But there is a balance in, now, I mean, as you said, everything's becoming a game. Crossing the street, getting into your car, going to a local mall and, there's no active shooter on site and some of those things. The prediction markets now, which is kind of another gray market that's moved onshore. So it's no longer offshore as your gray market. Everything's moved onshore. And everyone's finding these loopholes of being able to participate. First it was sweeps, now it's prediction markets. And for me, I think there's a world where it can all live in a responsible way and state, federal, which has always been an interesting education on seeing how the US works on those levels, that everyone can get something out of it, but they're all sort of just combating, everybody so much that definitely I think there's the danger of it going completely the other side where it becomes back to sort of the disdain side of it of, well, this gaming's ruining society and that kind of stuff as well.
I want to talk about Plannatech and Prime and all that, and what you said, dealing with American regulators and stuff. I mean, the way I see it, it's America is 50 different, especially when it comes to this, America is 50 different countries with kind of minor trade agreements. I mean, there's no two states are the same when it comes to, how they manage all of this, which I'm sure you're finding out, much to your chagrin.
Yeah, I was in front of the Ohio Gaming Commission, their monthly meeting recently. I said that, we're dealing with 50 little countries. It's like being in the European Union with all these kind of things. It's just, I've seen that happens globally in a lot of spots that, states have their little bits of power and can do different things. The same thing in Australia. There's different tax rates in different states within the ecosystem. But yeah, that's been a challenge through the whole process, learning those things. And then obviously there's a couple of things that if they could get over, which again, the Wire Act, which is the cross-border stuff, and then even the 0.25% tax that they do on the volume. There's certain things that they could have done on a federal level that would make it a more business-friendly sort of ecosystem. And that's the struggle right now, is anyone going through the state regulation side of it. Cost of doing business is insane. And then you've just seen these sweeps pop up, prediction markets pop up that have none of this excise tax or any of those things, which is just free flowing. Again, they might as well be located in Antigua, Jamaica, or the DR or something, because it's just the way it's looking.
So with all what you just said, now's the time to ask you, why did you decide to go ahead and buy Prime?
So I believe there is some states that it is viable to do this. I believe we've seen enough green shoots in a sense of, if you really sort of do the customer service, you find, it really only takes a few customers to ultimately be able to become profitable, and then getting the costs down. Prime unfortunately got into a couple of states right at the peak of it. They were the last sports skin, I think, at the time for New Jersey. So there was kind of a mad rush to get that one. Did a deal in Ohio that again was an excessive cost to them. Whereas Kentucky, the market access was pretty inexpensive and smaller state, good partner with Churchill Downs. But it was really sort of the only way we were going to do it was if those market accesses were reviewed and renewed. And now there's just, every state's full of market accesses that just will never have anybody else coming in to take them. And especially with everything else that's going on in the space as well. So there was enough green shoots in it that we believe that you can make money doing it this way. But, the branding, just being known that you exist amongst, the $1 billion of marketing on these other platforms is a challenge. But for me, and, my background is very much so that I was in Jamaica with the Greek for a number of years. I understand the offshore business. For a New Jersey coming in, I still believe there's at least $1.50 in the unregulated market than the regulated market. So we're not coming to compete with DraftKings and FanDuel and looking to compete with Bodog, BetOnline, and some of that stuff. But the other aspect of it is, the cost of business, cost of doing the business, the state taxes, which are always at threat. And again, with the Ohio, I'm like, why would we want to do business in Ohio? You've got legislators threatening to, make $10 limits or turn off sports betting completely. That's the biggest challenge of it. But there is a bit of a gamble, and I guess a bit of a lotto ticket is what happens if they do shut down sports contracts on prediction markets, and we're already in this space. So we've always looked at it as a 10, 15, 20-year view, but we're also looking at what the next 12, 18 months will hold. And maybe it's just too hard to overcome, but we were seeing enough that it was worthwhile taking a shot.
Prime has been with you, and when you were just the supplier there, looking for the sharper better, right? Looking, you're not cutting people off at the knees, you're doing it the old-fashioned traditional way, I guess. But then when I would look at Prime's numbers, there were some months that were just ugly, where you lose because you're attracting like the big bettors and the smarter bettors. So obviously for you, this is a volume game. And with prediction markets, kind of chewing into theoretically what you're offering, like I guess that if prediction markets make it through, and we'll talk about prediction markets in general in a second, but like, is that the biggest worry right now for what you're positioning Prime as?
Definitely they're getting some traction, but also think they're giving some education. And where I said before, there's dollar fifty in unregulated markets, state markets. I think it may be even more now because they've brought out this level of education for people that, were trading stocks Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And now they're looking for action in the evening. They're looking for action on the weekend that weren't there before. And I think, I came in thinking we could educate Americans on how to shop for odds and become better bettors. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the pathway for it to do that. They really just want the answer key, and that's what they'll bet. So there's sort of some balancing of how to tackle this on that level. But yeah, definitely prediction markets are sort of taking now a bit of the top end, but they also are taking some of that syndicate and professional money off our books. So, we still do have some of that recreational balance in the overall thing. So listen, it's a hard road forward. I think there is some opportunities on doing things a little bit differently, more grassroots for our community in the states that are in versus bombasting everyone. And I think the way the world cultures are going, and they're almost going back to an analog lifestyle of the younger generations, that ability to actually call somebody and someone pick up the other end rather than sitting on a live chat for an hour before you get some crappy answer. It's sort of been the best feedback that we've been getting on trying to continue that pathway. So we're not picking up everybody, we're just trying to find a niche market share, marketplace. And if we got 4 or 5%, we'd be dancing in the streets of market. The goal is more attention, for people to know we exist, and then see how it actually works going forward.
As someone who is, obviously, I'll call you a man of the world, everyone's running around in America like prediction markets, like they just discovered, something. But in fact, obviously, what prediction markets are offering have been around for quite some time. How do you reconcile that? Again, like why the idea of what prediction markets offering never really took off anywhere else, but there's a lot of billions of dollars saying that it's going to take off here. So is there a disconnect, or are we missing something here?
No, so I mean, Betfair took off, 20, 25 years ago. There was BetDAC, Matchbook, all those kind of ones got a lot of volume when there was a lot of recreational players in the pool. It's always funny watching Americans sort of, thinking they discovered daylight and, early days post-PASPA with the bonusing and some of these states that offered, ridiculous ability for these companies to charge back on their taxes to build their databases. There was roadmaps for all these things that have existed for decades. But yeah, I mean, now we're sort of doing exchanges again. And it's funny when I'm looking at these and I'm seeing the liquidity and whatnot, it's like, Betfair circa 2004, when you had 33% bookmakers, 33% professionals, and 33% recreational players. And that's really closed up that gap on that side of the world. But now it's a whole new world over here where you've got a lot of uneducated players coming into the space. And again, I always go back to the American consumer, that there's a lot of money here and there's a lot of liquidity and a lot of uneducated sort of people getting into this stuff, thinking, well, I watch NFL on a Sunday. I know who's going to win. But the intricacies of pre-game, live betting, and all those kind of things have just made it sort of another boom town for anybody that has an idea. And you even had people that, made fortunes on a World Cup just because they were educated, sort of professional syndicates that threw models together early in the year going, oh, let's see what it does. And again, the liquidity, the inefficiencies in the market were enormous.
About the World Cup, this is, I think, the 8th World Cup that you've been around to book. Anything jump out at you this time around? And I asked that because we spoke a few years ago. You had mentioned something on Captain Jack's New Year's Eve roundtable that like the World Cup, like America's sportsbooks are not going to be able to capitalize on it because of like the laws and, having people having trouble trying to sign up. This was before prediction markets, came to America. I'm guessing that the answer is, yeah, this World Cup was a little bit different from a, top-down perspective.
Yeah, for me, it was sort of, we looked at it as our coming out party for the World Cup. Back then we were probably hoping to have 8 to 10 states, but this was prediction markets coming out party because everybody that couldn't bet at a local sports book, whatever state they were in, could get prediction markets. And, just on winning the World Cup, there was in excess of $1 billion traded, I think, on Kalshi just for that one market. I mean, I've sort of been watching Sunday golf when I'm sort of trading that and betting that stuff, and they're doing 20, 30x of what Betfair is doing or was doing at their peak. Even the British Open, which is in their backyard, the amount of money sort of matched on Polymarket and Kelce was insane. And it showed up in the World Cup. Again, once it got going, once it was on TV, once the US started out all right, it sort of got the eyeballs on it, but it really made it prediction markets coming out party of the ability for really anybody to sign up. Now, I know since then, they've sort of blocked some states being based in Michigan with my driver's license in Michigan. Now it's sort of shut down that state. But again, is it a state by state thing that they tackle this? But the World Cup, I think the numbers will show on a state level what it was, what we thought it would be, the potential. But again, now we're just seeing so much of potential unregulated market on the state level. It was just a boom that not even I thought coming with the way that they felt in the last three to 6 months.
Going back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's your opinion that the recreational American sports bettor will give themselves a longer leash before they say, to hell with this, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm losing too much money?
See, that's the thing. I don't know how much they're really tracking it. I don't know how they're really noticing that they're a profitable stock market trader, but they're bleeding it all out on sports. Or they'll have a really good win, and that's the thing that'll stick in their head as, oh, well, I've done it once, I can do it again aspect as well. There's definitely a deeper pool, I think, potentially, so you can refill that pond with fish a little longer than what other countries are able to do. Because again, it's just the level of education of us, Scandinavian bettors, UK bettors, Australia bettors, Asian bettors, and that is just really different level. And I think when the US was opening up, every man and their dog wanted to come over and see, whether they could make it or not. But it just come down to the cost of doing business. A lot of people spending marketing dollars trying to compete with those big boys that had already been in there in fantasy or at brick and mortar brand was the struggle. And yeah, are we crazy for doing this? Probably. At the end of the day, I think there's still an underlying sort of need that can be picked up and hopefully work for us.
Well, at least in New Jersey, you'll be pretty well positioned if the prediction market, people that have come to start becoming quote unquote pros are going to need somebody like you if the prediction markets, disappear overnight. I used to work for a company that that did polling, right? And Americans, whenever you ask an American to rank how good looking they are, to rank how well they drive, to rank anything like that, without fail, about 72 to 74% of Americans put themselves well above average, right? So what you said was kind of rings true, that are we even bothering tracking? Americans, ask an American who bets, they will tell you that they are lifetime winners.
Well, it's funny because I'm here at Best Bash this week, and someone asked me last night, first person I ran into, they were like, is there actually any winners out there? We come to this event and everybody says they're a winner, but he'd been doing some things with some, respectable people in the industry, and he said they were just losing every week. And I said, yes, they do exist, but no else more so in the world over here. Yeah, everyone's a winner. You ask anyone, they go to the track, they're a winner. They go to the casino, they're a winner. But I think at the end of the day, that's, if everybody is really tracking it, just like people don't budget and all those kind of things really like they should, they would identify that, yeah, they're not on that side of it. And that's ultimately the other aspect of it is, and the challenge here is the excise tax with that 0.25%. If you could remove that and you're really competing against even people that lose 12% of their ROI, which is, a good sports bettor at the end of the day, then it sort of gives you the opportunity to build out that client base and just, paying on the GGR aspect of the taxes. But yeah, it's the one spot in the world that you could kind of come into and try and chip away at people that, think they're a lot better than what they are.
Have you found that to be a particularly American trait that people in other countries don't share?
There's a lot more, I think, humbleness in some other countries. And again, the consumer levels are just different over here as well. Again, it's a great marketplace to be in. And the goal is to chip away and see if there's a few changes that can happen, keep pushing sort of the excise tax. I think that's the first one that could really help the state-regulated entities. And then hoping that a lot of them sort of hold their taxes. So I know everyone's eager to raise those taxes. And then it becomes, they're really pushing the market back to the green market because of the overhead, of other aspects of it.
I was going to ask you this actually. So, outside of like dealing with the state regulators, what are the material differences, if you think there are any, between running a regulated market in America as opposed to running an offshore market?
Yeah, so generally it's the cost of the doing business. But the other aspect, so the pros are it's easier to process money within a regulated market. You know, you have all the, although some of them are restricting credit cards and some of those things, but it's easier to get deposits, money in, money out aspect of it. You know, on the struggle side of it is the way some of these states did market access. You know, I really in the early days saw Tennessee that they were sort of doing individual licenses and thinking, great, Tennessee's a state I want. Then they added 1.85% on volume tax, and it's like, you can't succeed at this. Like the economics of what states are doing and really understanding what the business is probably been the biggest struggle of it all. And this is where I've learned, and I've said this to regulators, I've now learned that regulators and legislators are very different things here. The regulators are kind of given a book of guidelines and, you know, sometimes they're handcuffed on what they can and can't do to really make it an open and viable business. So the good aspect of the prediction markets is maybe some of them review, you know, how much business they're losing because of the way they're structured. But I've also learned that Americans, like Australians, can be a little stubborn and hard-headed at times and go, well, this is what it is, you know, play or don't play. And that's where, you know, if money wasn't so difficult to move in and out, I think the grey market would really be flourishing a lot more than what it is right now. But that's the challenges that they have. And the $50 to $100 bettor isn't going through that process anymore. They're just going through locally. Now, on the flip side, you have some bigger players that are still wanting to play a certain way, and that's what will sort of keep that part of it alive. But if you start capturing them, finding their way into prediction markets and what, that's sort of the other piece of it as well. So it's a very big jigsaw puzzle, and the shapes and the pieces keep changing along the way. And it's just, you've got to try and keep building it and putting it together in the best way that you can. But as I said, it may just end up that it's too hard of a puzzle with too many pieces. And I think the next sort of 12, 18 months will really tell us that.
With your friends in the gray market books, are prediction markets, are they treating it as a material, like right now threat, or is it more like an existential, like down the road threat?
Well, I think a lot of the noise when PASPA was repealed was the business has got a few years left. I think the grey market took a hockey stick effect, and it just, again, it was the education level of people understanding. And one of the funniest stories I heard was, I think it was a regulator out of New Jersey. Within 2 weeks of PASPA being repealed, and they were out at a bar, and one of the guys was, oh, I bet on this game. And he's like, what do you mean? He said, well, didn't they just make it legal? So, you know, there's just an understanding of what you can and can't do on that level. But I think now some of them sort of potentially struggling, losing those smaller bettors. You know, US still hasn't worked out how to do credit betting, so that's sort of a bonus. However, prediction markets are doing leverage betting, so that's kind of chipping into that as well. And that's sort of the conversations that I have with regulators, really trying to educate them on some of the gaps that do fall within their legislations that they could do to be able to chip away at this. But everything moves slowly on that side of the counter.
Are you pleasantly surprised or consistently aggravated with regulators? Like, are they willing to listen, I guess is the question.
I will say the American regulators are probably some of the best regulators I've dealt with on this planet. There is some that are very willing to listen. There is a lot of them that understand that, you know, after 5 minutes talking with me, I've been doing this a while, so it's worth sort of listening to some of it. I've found regulators in some other countries very difficult to deal with, very sort of think they know what they don't know and all these things. And here it was, and I've said it many times over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, it's been very refreshing getting some of these conversations, some of these rooms. And one in particular is New Jersey. I'd always heard how fearful people were of New Jersey and how difficult that. No, I mean, again, it's just having conversations, being transparent. I guess my background as well, I've come in here saying, I know, you know, you can all see where I've been. You understand what I'm trying to do here, you know, regulating the unregulated or bringing the offshore home, sort of the paraphrases that I've used for a number of years, has sort of, you know, shown that they are willing to listen, and they've been very, very good through this process, which I was pleasantly pleased and surprised based on all the horror stories I'd heard from other people.
Here's a non-sports betting question. I'm born and raised. I live in New Jersey. I love living here in New Jersey. I mean, I like the food. You know, I like everything about New Jersey. I specifically love New Jersey from about May to September. And then from like October to, March, whatever, I want to get as far away from the state as possible and go somewhere where it's warm. You live in Jamaica, correct?
So yeah, I did about 20, 25 years in Jamaica, still have a residence down there and whatnot. However, I have been doing some time in Michigan. Love Michigan in the summers, not so much in the winters. After doing pretty much 25 years of pure summers, a winter in Michigan was like going back home to Australia, where I grew up in the South, where it was always, wet and miserable in the winter. I fully understand where you're coming from on that one.
Well, I'm curious, what would you say to people like myself who are like, man, I want to pack it up and move to Jamaica or, another island country down there? Pros and cons, lay it out.
So the cons is definitely access to some of those things you mentioned, food, the ability to get product into an island, expensive on the duties and some of that stuff. But if you're flying back and forth, you can always fill your suitcase each time you go down. The doing business, some of those aspects are very painful and slow with banking and things like that. Although on some islands, there is some ways to make things move quicker. But yeah, it's very much island type. You've got to have it in your head just to be sort of chilled, relax, and enjoy the process. And that's ultimately where you're going for some of that as well. I've spent a lot of time in Costa Rica the last 10, 12 years. For me, and I've been saying this more the last few years, the more I traveled, the better Australia looked until I got to Costa Rica. And I think Costa Rica just has everything that I need. Pacific side beach, if you need a Caribbean side, if you want some of that sort of culture as well. And then the hot springs and the rainforest and the mountains. And I mean, I've heard the stories of the evolution of, it's sort of built into a small city now in San Jose of what was available 20 years ago from the guys that I've worked with in the past. But even what I've seen in the last 10 years with the malls popping up and some of these things, you really do have a lot of that stuff. And there's a lot of countries like that. I think Colombia is another one that has definitely evolved and grown versus the days of what Americans might remember with Pablo Escobar and all that fun stuff. I've read. And all these cultures and all these cities are really grown in maturity and the availability of things as well. But it's a mindset. You've got to go into it knowing that it's different. Some things are more difficult. And then obviously you've got to balance. So 10 years in Costa Rica, I can order a beer and food. I was very thankful Uber arrived, so they didn't have to talk to taxis. So we can get away with just Uber only as well. So there's a balance that we choose at the end of the day.
Yeah, Costa Rica has gotten into my skin. We've been there a bunch of times in the last few years, and I now, unfortunately, have become the Costa Rican dark roast coffee, which you can't find anywhere in the States. Now I'm getting mailed to me from Costa Rica. It's like that's all I drink now, so that's a problem. But yeah, I feel like Costa Rica, it's interesting. When you go as a tourist, everything is sunshine and rainbows, right? You're always looking like you're looking at it through a tourist eye. I've been there enough times now that like I start looking at it. I start watching interactions between people who live in Costa Rica, like just their day-to-day interactions, and the Pura Vida. It's not bullshit. They actually seem to be like a much kinder, gentler, easier going people as a general rule. But again, maybe it's still tourist eyes I'm looking at it through.
No, I agree on that 100%. And that's why I say in the recent years, I've just said it's almost as good as it comes because, yeah, people are pleasant. People are generally happy, even in the toughest of times. And they just sort of have that spirit of, continue on with life. Everything's chill, punch in, punch out, do their job and move on. But yeah, definitely what they preach is what they do.
My favorite Costa Rica story that kind of sums this up, and I'll try to make it as quick as possible. When we were there about 6 years ago, we were in Tamarindo on the Pacific coast. And my son was real into fishing at the time. He was like 11, 12 years old. So we chartered a boat for like $200. It was just my family. And like the guy on there, we're catching fish. He's filleting them. He's getting them all ready. And he says to me, I got a buddy who works at one of the restaurants, on the beach. If you want, I can call ahead. He can meet us there. He can grab the fish and, he'll cook the fish up for you like all week. And I, me being from New Jersey, I'm like, come on, like, what's the catch here? Like bullshit, Yeah, my buddy Luis, he'll be fine. And I'm looking at my wife. I'm looking at the guy. My wife's like, I don't know. I'm like, all right, whatever. And I basically, in my mind, I'm signing over my life to whoever's going to meet me at the beach, right? So we pull up to the beach on the boat. Luis is standing there. He grabs our fish. He's like, you'll get like 5-6 meals out of this. He's like, come on, I'll show you my restaurant. We walk over to his restaurant. He goes, this is like easily like 5 or 6 meals. All I ask is that have a beer, order a beer. We're not going to, we won't charge you for the fish. I'm looking at him like, Luis, what? Why? He's like, Pura Vida, just enjoy. So we did. We enjoyed. We went there virtually every day. The kids are ordering French fries and chicken fingers. Me and my wife are eating the fish, drinking Imperials till the sun comes up. And now every time we go back to Costa Rica, when we see Luis and we have to say goodbye at the end of the week, everybody's crying, including Luis. There was no scam. It was just somebody being nice, you know? You don't see that here in New Jersey.
No, you don't. And I will add a little tidbit to that story. So same area, got a boat, took the kids out, caught so many fish. We took about 60 pounds of fish back to San Jose from the beach. Ruined my kids forever. They think every time now you just drop the line and just pull it up fish. So yeah, I mean that side of the island, and I called it an island once when I was first leaving. They're like, no, this isn't an island. And I realized I'd literally lived 25 years of my life on islands. But yeah, it's just you get off the plane, your head's not swiveling. You just sort of go into a different level of calm when you're there, for sure.
After we hang up this call, I'm definitely moving. I can't take it anymore. I really, I don't know. I'm still aggravated at like my great grandparents, you know, from Poland and Russia and God knows where else. They get into, you know, some steerage cabin. They're sick and dying to get to America. They get to Brooklyn and they're like, far enough. This is it. We're stopping here, you know. Let's get back to betting for a second. You mentioned excise tax a bunch. What you're trying to do at Prime depends on volume. So I understand why the excise tax, you know, and volume tax is such a issue for you. Do you have any hope of seeing that disappear? I mean, what are you getting from when you talk to people about it?
A few years ago, it sounded like it was a done deal, like they were going to, you know, remove it. There was a lot of people lobbying for it and whatnot. I've really not heard much in recent times on the lobbying side or any of those kind of changes. But it is a key aspect. Yeah, we have, you know, in Ohio, we have a really good player, bets a lot of short-priced favorites, which win a lot of the times. I mean, you've got to win as the house, maybe 1 out of the 20 bets, sort of make a profit on the GGR side, but it ends up being a lot of volume and a lot of 0.25%. There's just another challenge in front of us. So you've really sort of, you know, I'd like to be a lot more aggressive. At times I'd like to go up almost like minus 102, 103, you know, just on a Monday night football game or something, just to sort of draw some business and just take bets for taking bets fund. But with the excise tax, it's just impossible to do those kind of things. I mean, I remember 20 years ago, you used to have no juice Fridays for like 2 hours in the afternoon on a Friday offshore where, again, you're just taking the bets and you don't have that overhead of that excise tax. When you're just fighting the profits and just the GGR aspect of it, as high as some of these states are, there's just kind of that underlying sort of, I'm taking something from your pocket every time you take a bet before you even win it. Tennessee really destroyed their state on building out, you know, 1.85% on volume and really not understanding the economics of how sport betting is such a small margin business versus the iGaming and some of those things.
So much has changed since you started this journey in the business, you know, on both sides of the counter. Not computers, for instance, you know, like, you know, and the ability to use them. What would people who were your age in 1995 when you started this, right, what would be considered the old timers today, what would their take be on all of this, do you think?
Well, you know, I mean, website is the evolution of it. Yeah, I started out with phone, notepads, and then all around the office walls were the ledgers, and you would go and you would write in the bet and you would adjust the exposure, and then you'd have to go through at the end of the game, circle the winning, and then go and enter. Not even an Excel sheet back then. I think it was pre-Excel days. And you sort of have everybody's balances available. It's just, everything's changed so much. We're just moving so much faster now. I've got people in conversations and during the World Cup, and at the end of it, they're like, ChatGPT told me that Spain was going to win. So, well, $1 million, probably bet Spain. But again, I'm looking at it very differently, trying to, you know, look for value rather than actual winners at the end of the day. But just the evolution of technology, the way it's the internet. And I kind of, the more I look back on it, grew up in a golden era where early days internet in Australia, where I was getting lines from all over the world, and books locally didn't have those kind of updates. And then when I moved to Jamaica at the end of 2000, after the Sydney Olympics, it was like, holy crap, there's another 500 sportsbooks here for me. So through that evolution, it's kind of 90% of my bets have been between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. wherever it's located, because none of them run night shifts and whatnot. But and I think that's just the whole aspect of information availability. The way that these guys today can take every stat within a game or a sport or anything of that and turn it into the live betting aspect. That's probably the biggest leap in this as well. Now today, tennis, international basketball, you look at 85, 90% of the money is done live. You see some books that were 5-6 years ago, 100% full game are now sort of 50-50 live and pre-game as well. So there's sort of that evolution of everything that sort of happened during that time. And that's not just in the sports betting and the game, but that's sort of the process. And then obviously there's the dark side. There's the iGaming and the casino aspect, where you used to actually get in your car, go to a pub or something at a casino. Now you can get up in the morning, sit on the toilet, and you're playing blackjack or something.
I've been there, buddy. Last question before I let you go, and back to the idea of American exceptionalism. What's it been like being interviewed by the smartest, funniest, most modest, best-looking podcaster in the business?
It's always a lot of fun.
Adam Bjorn, thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, cheers. Thanks, Jeff.